Red light. There it is. Good evening and welcome to the January 9th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we have a little different setup and a few guests to update us on some of the things that are going on in the city. But first we have I know it's old, but we need an approval of the minutes for the November 14th meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes for November 14th, 2019.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion, changes? None, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. With that, I would like to go into our first important guest here this evening. Our mayor, Mary Lou Pauly, has agreed to come and share some information with us. So I'm just going to say welcome to our commission meeting, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioners. I came this evening because I wanted to start off 2020 by wishing you a happy 2020 and also to take this opportunity to thank you. Thank you for volunteering your time to serve on a Citizens Commission. I'm sure folks who are watching this on TV tonight don't realize that you aren't the actual council, that you are a Citizens Commission interested.
Really? I thought we were.
The second council. And so I think it's really important that I come once in a while and let you know that I'm watching the work that you do, and we are using the work that you do, informing the council on the decision-making those tough decisions that they have to make. And so what you're doing is super important, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your community involvement. For those who are watching at home and may not understand fully what you do, you provide guidance and a direction for Issaquah's future growth through continuous review and improvement of the comprehensive land use plan and related documents. I think it's one of the largest charges that we give to any board or commission that we have. These should be some of the most desirable seats to have, because you are really sitting in seats that have a dramatic effect on what the city's going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 25 years from now. You're kind of painting the canvas with the recommendations and the work that you are doing for what we're going to be when we grow up. So I wanted to make sure the community knew that as well. I had a couple of thoughts, too, that I thought I would share. I'm going to be doing a tour and visiting each of the boards and commissions, but I thought I'd talk specifically about the work that you're currently doing. I want to make sure that you are aware that in the decisions, in the work that you're doing and the recommendations you're making, there's a lot of other things going on in the region and in the state and in our city that affect what you do. And we can provide information sessions to provide context. I'll give an example. Currently within the administration right now, we are at the staff level looking, finishing off a buildable lands inventory, buildable lands. And it's an exercise we go through before we sit down with the county and we start talking about growth targets. And growth targets are probably something you're familiar with because they are amended, and that comes through here. But that's a pretty big, serious conversation we're going to have, and you'll have some role in reviewing material and making recommendations. And there may be information outside of just the normal what's in your packet that would be helpful to provide you some context for your decision making. So please think about that and consider what we may be able to do to help better inform you while you're having your deliberations and discussions. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I might have said it last time. We did adopt as a city a strategic plan last year, and it has 6 major goal areas. One is growth and development. It's right in your wheelhouse. You don't have to read the whole plan, but I sure would appreciate it if you looked at the growth and development section and you looked at the goals, the objectives, and the action items associated with that. In last fall's budget, the council has started to work on some of these action items, and they directly affect and feed into future work that you will see. So please take a look at that. I'd love it if you read the whole plan, but even just the growth and development section would be good. As we brought on a new city administrator, we have made some adjustments in our organization to structure ourselves to be able to move the needle in these goals areas. So we have moved some people around, and we are working on how do we best tool ourselves as an organization to move the needle in these goal areas. This is what the community told us they want us to do, and I'm excited that we have this plan and the structure, and we're working to be successful in that. The other thing I want to talk about is closing the loop. I know that you prepare for these meetings, you attend these meetings, you collaborate with each other, but I'm not sure that after your work is done and your recommendation moves on, that we've got a really good way of closing the loop with you. It's my expectation that as your work proceeds up through council or to whichever body it's going to, that there's a feedback loop that tells you how council took your recommendation, what they did with that, how it informed their decision. Maybe they went on a different track. Understanding that is super important, I think, for you in your future decisions. So I want you to know that we're committed to doing that. An example that I'll throw out there right now, I was talking with the chair earlier this evening about the rezone for the Providence Heights properties, and want to make sure that has gone to council. Council has had a meeting on it. I know you don't have the time, nor should you have to have the time to watch every time one of your items is before council, but it is coming up again on January 21st, and it's been a very interesting journey. I watched your videotape of your meeting, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page on why decisions are getting made the way they're getting made. I think that will help you in your deliberations. I think the last thing maybe last two things, is recruitment and development. You are excellent agents to help us recruit for boards and commissions as well. So I'm glad that you're serving, I'm glad that you're here, but please, when you're out in the neighborhood, tell people about what you do. What you do, why it's important, why you like it. We're trying to engage as many of our community members as we can, and you guys are just great advocates for us out there. And we will be doing some recruiting this spring. And the last piece was development. It's been a real pleasure for me to work with our city clerk and our deputy city clerk talking about boards and commissions and board development, commission training, procedures for meetings, role of the chair, duties of the chair. I love this stuff. I think it's great. And I've got a really strong team inside the building. So I'm super excited that they're here tonight to do some training, and I hope you enjoy it. So thank you very much for the time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I turn it over to our clerk.
And I just realized that I'm sitting in your chair.
You are. Take care of my chair.
With that, this evening is going to be a little bit different. It's a training meeting. It's not, we're not going to be looking at any issues in the city. So we're going to take this opportunity to just be comfortable with what's going on, what we should be responsible for, and how we should do it. So with that, our long-serving city clerk, Tina, is here to run us through some of the things that maybe changes, things that we should look at and consider in the next year. So, Tina?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. First, I want to say that I echo the mayor's comments. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. I'm Tina Eggers. I'm your city clerk, and alongside me is Tisha Gieser. She's the deputy city clerk. So you have some great resources at your hand. Please don't forget that. We are a resource to you and to the staff liaison. So thank you for having us here for this joint training with staff and with you. I have to admit that neither Tisha or I are 100% this evening, so bear with us if we get a little foggy or if a coughing fit occurs, but we will do our best to be sharp for you. If you have questions along the way or input, please speak up so that we can really use this as an interactive session. We will also, if you find that we come to a point where we are navigating into a new section and you feel that you'd like a break, please let us know. That would be appropriate.
Tina, before you start, would you, since many of us have not been introduced to your pal here,
Tisha,
could you
Gieser?
just kind of introduce us to her?
Oh, yes, well, I let Tisha do that. So she is our great deputy clerk, and she's just a fantastic resource. So please give us some background.
Oh, thank you. I'm Tisha. I've been working for the city of Issaquah for 4 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Alaska State Legislature and got to serve on the House floor. And so I love talking about parliamentary procedure, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. I help support many of our council meetings and really believe in efficient meetings and respectful meetings, and we're thrilled to be with you tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks. So yes, we have a slightly revised PowerPoint for you. It doesn't deviate too much from what was in your packet, but if you follow along on your devices, you'll be up to speed. We would like to start by talking about your bylaws, which are referred to as rules and regs or rules and regulations. Thank you. So it's important to recognize the hierarchy of how this board is guided. So obviously, you've got your top tier, which is state law and the RCW. The second tier is the Issaquah Municipal Code, and that is how this board was established. So it has some defined set about your membership and about your practices. It also provides you to establish bylaws or your rules and regs. So that would be your next tier. And additionally, your parliamentary authority, which we use Robert's Rules of Procedure. You'll hear about parliamentary a little bit later, but we do want to say we don't want to over-process or over-regulate or over-do parliament. So we really want to keep things to what's the intent, what's your outcome, and try to keep it as easy as possible for you. So your last rules and regs formally adopted were from 2003. Now, you have revisited your bylaws, or excuse me, your rules, as we're referring to them, in the last year and a half or two. We're at that stage now that we'd like you to, we've taken another look at them, and so we have a newest, cleanest version in your packet. We weren't planning on walking you through all those items. We certainly could, but we'd like to highlight sort of the sections that we thought were of most significance and get you ready for adoption at your, which meeting? January 23rd meeting, so that there's some time to, one, give us some more feedback, and then two, get those formally adopted. So we look to create consistency. We want clarity. We want to remove any outdated terminology. And of course, we want to align this with council and other boards and commissions and with your municipal code section. So the crosswalk document that Tisha created, thank you, Tisha, is in your packet. And this document sort of talks about, and this is the crosswalk document from your 2003 bylaws. So this says, we added a section on membership. We added chair duties so that it was more formalized. There were things that the chair was already doing. We also believe that this is helpful because it provides some insight into if any other member is interested in serving in that role, sort of what those responsibilities are, and and when you're interested in taking on that sort of assignment, what it would include. And then a section 4 deals with meetings. And there's a variety of things that we provided some clarity on. And then we made some movement in parliamentary authority. That section is still there. And specified how and when amendments would occur to these bylaws. You really don't want them to be easy to change, so you want to make sure that it's thoughtful, that you have the majority of the commission, and that it's on the agenda in advance and well noticed, so that if others that have input on that they have that time to get that to you. So the key changes that we were going to be looking at were attendance, alternatives in voting, but again, please, if you want to delve into some other sections of the bylaws, rules and regs, let me know. So let's look at attendance and alternate participation. So if you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this section has been enhanced to really specify that we're looking for attendance, and if you're unable to attend due to illness or travel plans, vacations, that you have alerted your commission, not just the staff liaison, but you need to function as a board. So with that, you can use things like other business and announcements on your agenda towards the end of your meeting. You may already be doing that. So when you're looking at your planning calendar, sort of before you adjourn, it can be that forward thinking of I'm going to be unavailable in April. This also allows you to ensure that you have coverage amongst yourselves, that you can afford to have one or two members down, but that is about it. Attendance is important, but we understand that there are life and business issues that make that 100% attendance impossible or difficult. So, but the more that you can share at your meetings, that availability, the better. It also helps with planning for special meetings. I would like to say that the bylaws have included a minimum of a 5-day notice. Now, there are some exceptions, of course, because what if you become ill or something unexpected happens? Then, of course, as long as you're providing notice to the staff liaison and to the support person, then they can carry on your absence to the body that evening. But really, it's about knowing in advance. Plus, it helps your alternate positions know if they're needed to be serving and educated and up to speed, so that they can be part of that dialogue and part of the vote that evening when they're filling in for those vacant seats that night.
Are attendance roles or just management of it conducted by the city or by the chair?
That's a good question. So there's the other component to this is having excused and unexcused absences. So an excused absence is notifying ahead of time, having a rationale, a reason behind that, and then the second part would be that the chair would be announcing that at the start of the meeting. Commissioner so-and-so is unavailable this evening and has provided notice and is listed as an excused absence. If you hadn't heard from a particular commission member, you would need to indicate that they are listed as unexcused. That would be recorded in minutes. That's important because we rely on the minutes, which is recording of what's happening at the meeting, if they were excused or unexcused. Your municipal code says that if you have 3 unexcused absences, that impacts your ability to continue service on the board. So we want to make sure that, most importantly, that we're covered. This is costly to the agency. Staff is, working to bring items to you, and if we can't meet for lack of a quorum, then it can be costly to staff, to attorneys, to applicants, and possibly hinder the process that council is looking at.
And is the 3 unexcused absences a year or for the term?
It would be consecutive. So, but we really look for attendance is important. That's, that's why you joined this body. But it is written in a rather unique way that says it would have to be 3 unexcused consecutive absences.
Consecutive meaning meetings, like 3 in a row?
Correct. And really the intent of that is to have a mechanism to remove someone who has just non-responsive, non-attending, non-responsive. And we've seen 1 or 2 of those folks over the years, and that's okay, but at least we have a way to move forward. Was there other questions about attendance?
Any rewards for good attendance?
Absolutely. Oh, I did want to ask, so the way that the bylaws are written drafted, the rules drafted at this point indicate that you would be providing notice to the staff liaison with a copy to the support person, which is Gretchen. Other boards and commissions will say you need to notify the staff liaison and the chair. So that is a consideration. You could require that to be in your bylaws so that the chair is informed along the same time that the staff liaison is, because you may be in a position that you're sort of scrambling to figure out who will be filling that seat that evening. So that could be helpful. It's a practice that our city council uses. They inform the council president and the city clerk at the same time that they're notifying us of an absence or future absence. So I could flag it, or I could just say you want to continue it with the language?
Is there a reason why different commissions have different rules? Not just with this, but with procedural aspects as well?
We would like to see them as aligned as close as possible.
Yeah.
We certainly don't want to provide too much process in your rules and regs, because then it takes away some flexibility. But this could certainly be this element is more about communication. Who do you think it's helpful to communicate to, so that as you're entering this room, you're informed? And it does put some added pressure to the staff liaison to disperse that information, and there could be a lag in time.
I would then ask Trish, our staff liaison, if you've found that it's been cumbersome, or that you would be more benefited in your role by having an expanded distribution list for that. Would that be more helpful to you? 'Cause that's ultimately what it comes down to, is how can we best help you?
Right, it wouldn't matter to me who else knows. I usually let the chair know if I hear someone's not going to be here, either before the meeting, or if there's many, I'll let the chair know that I'm having troubles getting a quorum. But to me, it's more up to the chair. Would the chair want to know immediately, or would the chair,
I don't think the chair needs to know immediately, but it would be nice at least the day before if, if there's no quorum or if who's going to be here, so, yeah.
Yeah, so you may want to just, as a practice or as a courtesy, if you felt it was, late approaching the meeting time, to include the person. You don't have to, you can still do that and not have it written in your rules and regs.
I just think it would be nice if, for some reason, you say you're coming or you say you're not coming, and all of a sudden you appear. It would be nice to notify somebody that you are not going to be here. If you're sick, whatever, you can't make the meeting, you're in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
That's all, just so you kind of keep a record, know who's going to be here.
Right, and it helps establish if it's an excused or unexcused
Right.
absence, which is important to the makeup
Right.
of the board. Okay, so we'll leave the language as is, and if you would like to later make changes to that to fit your mood or how things feel,
You
we can
have
do that.
Trish's email. Sometimes Trish is not in the office or is on her way here. It's easier to email the chair, whoever the chair is, to notify them.
I don't believe we all have one another's email.
No, I don't have yours, for example.
I have Gretchen's, I have,
Yeah, it would, it
I
would,
would
email.
give it to you now, but I don't.
yeah.
And this year, right back out the other one.
You do have the ability under the OPMA, this is not a violation, to copy or send a message to the entire board. So you do have an email address you could use to say, Planning Policy Commission at issaquah.gov, I'm unexpectedly unavailable, or I would be delayed by an hour. And that includes Trish as well. So as long as you're not replying and discussing your agenda items, you're fine. But if you're talking about attendance and availability, that is allowed under full, excuse me for my fog brain, but for full knowledge of the board to be aware of. All right. So for alternate members, we revised the rules now so that there's more clear and clarity of their roles. So up until this point, while your practice has been allowing alternate Alternates, that's the word I'm looking for. To vote only when attempting to meet a quorum, we are asking the commission to fill membership to the fullest extent. So meaning that the alternates serve in the absence of any regular member that evening. This gives you, the commission, and the community the value of greater variety of perspectives. While your previous rules did not preclude the commission from this full benefit, the revised rules state that this practice is required. So it's providing clarity on the intent.
I have a couple.
So I've been on 2 other commissions, and in both of them, we considered all of whether you were an alternate or not, we all voted, made the motions, considered them basically regular members. Which is different than what we were just talking about.
Right. And regardless if there was participation of the alternates in those scenarios, technically they did not have a voting right either.
I understand, but the way that it was basically scheduled, everybody voted.
Right. So there's a difference between consensus and, discussion and consensus and formal votes. So this would be one that we would want alignment across all boards and commissions.
Well, I'm just saying that it should be equal on all commissions.
Right.
That's what I'm getting at.
And that is what we're asking for. We would like to change that behavior if it's occurring. Yep.
Couple of questions. Being
Sure.
how I'm an alternate, so I'm still not quite clear about what the meaning of the words "anytime." So let's say there's a quorum of voting members, but there is one voting member or more than one that's just not in attendance.
Sure.
And I attend because I'm an alternate and I come.
Right. So you're a 7-member commission.
By example.
And if any one of those 7 are not there, a alternate has the ability to fill that seat at that moment, at that time.
All right, so I think I understand that. So the second question then, related, just to make sure I understand, I watched the last half hour or so of a council meeting, I think it was October or November, to do with Providence Point. And the comment came up, correctly or incorrectly, and this is the question, from one of the council members, that he had observed that in a vote that we took on the Providence Point, that there was, I think there's 6 of us. I was the one alternate, and the vote was, if you added up alternate and voting, the vote was tied. But because I was an alternate, it was 3-2, and it went forward. And the comment the gentleman
Yeah.
made was that shouldn't happen. So I'm confused a
Right.
bit about this.
Which is partly why we are here, and we want to provide clarity to your bylaws. We are familiar with that evening and how the vote took place. It has been your practice, and the vote stood, and there wasn't objection to it. And so from our perspective, it was valid. We didn't see any issues with it, but we certainly want all your seats filled, all your regular member seats filled, so that the votes can be considered.
The vote happened based on what we were understanding and taught how to run a meeting and who was supposed to be voting. And so until you come in to change it and make it more palatable, because I think they should have had the opportunity to vote, the vote was taken under the guidelines that were in place before.
Under the
now.
practice or the understanding, but your former rules didn't preclude you from that. We certainly want to ensure that that practice moving forward is in alignment with your municipal code.
I don't think it's a problem whichever way you go, just as long as it's understood and that's the way it should be done, so
Right.
that there's nobody that feels that they hadn't had the opportunity to vote or do whatever they needed to do. So.
Right. And we still, suggest that alternates who are alternates in the capacity for the evening to participate in your discussion up until, though, there is a motion on the floor, because that really is the motion of the voting members.
So Tina, if there's a quorum, which constitutes 4 regular members, and there's 5 of us up here, and one of them's an alternate, the idea is the 4 people constitute a quorum, the 5th alternate vote is not necessary?
No. We want,
Opposite, you do want the 5th
we
vote.
want any of the 7 members, regular members, if any one of those is gone, you could have, how many alternates do you have? 2 or 4? 2? So you could have 2 serving that night or 1 as a regular member. We want the fullest vote possible.
7 votes.
7 or 6, depending on what your
So,
capacity is.
so apparently then I guess the council member who had previously brought that up would have been incorrect? That was,
They simply just questioned, did it occur correctly? And we said that was your practice, and that we were looking to come back to you and have some revised rules and regs to clarify that alternates serving in the seat of any absent regular member has a voting right. They're serving as that regular member that evening. Or not as that regular member, they are serving as a regular member.
You know, I apologize, but I'm confused, because I read this when I was going over the packet. I read it as, if you're an alternate and you're attending a meeting, but there is a quorum, that you can't vote.
Right.
Yeah, let's
That's
look
the
at the
way I-
language, make sure that we didn't omit a word or,
You did, because I was in the same boat that you were, because I thought,
we try hard, but yes, this is why we're not adopting them this evening. Here we go. So let's see what section that falls under. And let me put this in track changes, so if we make an edit.
Are we currently the only board that has been operating in this way? Has everyone else been following the maximum number of seats being voted on?
We believe so. We believe that the other boards are now,
Both in bylaw and practice? Okay.
so have you given this presentation to other boards?
when we do our annual training, we talk about roles of alternates and have, like, for example, the Arts Commission has changed some of their practices.
Okay, so
in that.
that's-
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And the DC operates this way as well?
To my knowledge, yes. Yep. So.
I realize, sorry, my question had only been about boards, so that's why I realized I
Sure.
needed to expand.
What section, do you know where the wording was, what section, or?
Well, I'm looking at section 3, page 10 of 69, the
Okay.
portion that I underlined, and the slide that you had up there before.
Oops.
Excuse me.
There we go.
But, so 4 or more regular members of the commission or alternates filling in for any absent regular member shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. And then the next one, B, says that once the meeting has been called to order, the chair will announce which alternates will be voting members and their status will be noted in the minutes, which, again, seems to me, in conjunction with the slide that was just up there, that unless this specific action takes place, you can be an alternate and participate in the discussions, but if there's a quorum with the permanent members of the commission, and you can't vote.
Correct.
Unless the chair specifically apparently
Yeah,
says.
it's just not clear to me whether an alternate can vote or not, and if so, what the circumstances are. I may be the only one on the commission that is.
No, I agree.
confused.
I agree with you. I was going to
That's why
bring
I
it up
brought it
at the same time. I think it should just need a little bit more clarification.
So a quorum is 4 to have a meeting.
Right.
A minimum quorum is 4. Alternates will serve in the absence of any regular member. So whether it's 4, 5, 6, or 7, there's 7 seats. Once the meeting has been called to order.
If you have, I think, as I'm reading this, I feel clear, but I helped write it. So if you have any suggestions for specific wording to make this better, let us know.
May I
Is it that
suggest-
there's 7 voting seats, so that you're trying to get to the 7 voting seats with a mixture of regular members, and then if there's not 7 regulars, then you fill in with 1 or 2 of the, so that's the goal, is to get the highest number up to 7 that are voting?
Right. We're not asking for a minimum quorum, we're asking for the fullest membership.
I think there should be a sentence then that specifically addresses the voting of alternates to fill that desire.
We
And that makes it real cut and clear and dry.
And that was the intention of B. So alternates will serve in the absence of any regular member. Any one, if you have, as Tina has spoken, if there's one person missing,
But
your alternate will
serve, you know,
fill.
we've talked about this differentiation
Okay, so
between discussions,
Got it.
being able to do a motion and voting.
Okay.
And so I think it should just be real
Right.
crystal.
What they move from is, at that moment, they are no longer an alternate. They are a regular member.
Can you, Tina, can you put up that one that was up there before we got into this?
The agenda?
The PowerPoint?
Oh, the
PowerPoint,
PowerPoint. Sure.
Okay. If not filling in as a voting member, may participate in discussion, but not in debate on a motion or in voting.
Correct. That's only if their status is still alternate. So let's say you have 7 regular members here.
Right.
And you have an alternate who is truly just an alternate that
eighth
evening.
person.
The 8th
Yes.
or the 9th.
Then, be informed and provide some, input, maybe ask some questions. But once a motion has been made, they don't have the authority to make a motion, and 2, they can't vote on it, so they shouldn't be debating on the motion. That's the intent of that. That's parliamentary.
I might suggest that regarding the second sentence here in number B, back on page 10, you introduced this idea that the chair must announce. I don't know that, maybe you knew that you had to announce this, but I'm not sure the intent of that. If this is supposed to be kind of almost a quasi-automatic process, then why would the chair, why are you adding that extra step? That seems to me to add.
So the announcement is important because it creates the record in the minutes and clarity. So if there's an objection from what's happening or who is in what role, there's the optics too. So without that formal announcement, it would be unclear what role that individual will be serving in. And council does it. So, council doesn't have alternates, but the mayor will announce at the beginning of the meeting whether someone is excused or not. And say for another board, it's the expectation that the chair would announce who was serving as an alternate member.
And Tina, I think
regular
in the interviews for commissioner that we do to fill these seats, I don't recall that it was part of the presentation or the job description where we really, in writing, encourage alternates to attend meetings whether or not there's a quorum or not, because, and I've thought about this in the past, because
Right.
some alternates go, okay, they got a quorum, I don't have to attend, and they miss unless they watch the video after the
Right.
fact. So I think I would suggest that might be something that we could put into either the interview process or the definition of.
We have many of the other, I don't know if that question's being posed to this commission, but I know that many of the other recruitment and interview questions pose that question. Your attendance is important, will you come? The whole point of alternates is to be able to step in and be up to speed and informed, plus vacancies occur. And so that is even more important to have your alternates ready to serve as a voting member.
I wasn't in the last interview because I was being interviewed, but I think we always discussed, went into detail about what the role of an alternate was because you always have to ask, will you be happy with either a regular membership or an alternate? And you had to explain what that alternate meant and how involved you were going to be. So.
And it is
just note that.
confusing because DC uses theirs differently. They actually call them when they need them, and otherwise they don't have to attend. And
Right.
PPC's always been different, and we want you here all the time because our issues take more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 nights. So we want that consistency with the knowledge and the questions and all that. But it is different.
I don't quite understand, I really don't understand why there's that on issues as critical as that, why there aren't just standard expectations for all the commissions. I mean, okay.
I think that's the intent of tonight, is to try and get that.
Yeah.
Right. It's January 2020.
New Year.
A new day.
You're our first board to have this conversation with. All right, let me check my notes and make sure that,
Do you think anything would be drafted, Tina or Tisha, to make any of it clearer from the comments? Okay, Tisha's on it.
Yeah, I think we can add some clarification to section B. I've turned my page, but to be a little bit more explicit with the language there.
You
Absolutely.
could add
thanks.
number 7 somewhere in there
Yes,
to
yes,
explain.
that's a great suggestion. Yes.
Well, no, never mind.
Honestly, it's good for us to know too, because in situations, obviously, the Providence Point adjacent properties are on our mind since it's, very, applicable to what we're discussing. It helps us to figure out a consensus too of saying, how are you feeling? What is your gauge when we're coming down to figuring out what motions we want to do? Because ultimately, we're trying to advance business on at the recommendation of staff, our interactions with the public, and our best ability to advise rather than just being stalled out. So often we're having discussions saying, how are you feeling about this? So knowing that we're trying to get to 7 honestly is important for us to know, because we're not trying to act as an island. We are as a body trying to make our best recommendation, even if we are split. So it's important for us to actually know, because it's a different way of coming about really that consensus that we're trying to do every time.
One of the things that I have a problem with, we are presented with an agenda, and it's usually the first time we see that particular information. And I know that, just as the mayor had talked earlier about, there's other things going on, and maybe other commissions or other meetings had taken place in the city that would shed some light on this particular meeting and our discussion. So it would be nice if, ahead of time, if there was anything that was going on in the city that was in relation to what we were discussing, it would be nice to know that before we had a meeting. Keep going. Okay.
make sure.
Actually, quick question. So just to be clear, we can vote to have a consensus and have without actually making an motion, correct?
In some cases, yes. And Tisha,
You're jumping ahead.
which is
Perfect.
I won't jump ahead then.
do we want to, I'm just going to consult with my parliamentary expert over here. Do we,
I think that we should ask.
okay. Yeah.
So we have another question related to alternates. So currently, the draft rules they state that an alternate will serve anytime there are fewer than 7. We'll make that more clear. But what they don't say is if the 7th member arrives, what happens? That can stay as is where it's not really stated. Or an option would be to clarify what happens. And one of our other boards, the Transportation Advisory Board, they have some language in their rules that say that if the regular member arrives, that out of courtesy, they may allow the alternate to continue to serve through that agenda item and then resume their seat. And I don't know how frequently this would happen among your commission, and so again, it could be something that just sort of remains unsaid and you'd sort of navigate that when it occurred, or you could task us with putting a provision in your rules.
That's something you could just keep as is, and then if and when you find you want clarity, then we can incorporate some tools
Well,
into
it
your
does
rules.
say when the regular member is not there. So when the regular member comes, I would assume that they would take their place and the alternate would.
Unless there's still a seat.
Yeah,
that is
I think
serving
that's
in that.
clarity, as long as you put the 7 votes in and say that the alternate is taking the place of somebody that's not there.
Well,
Okay.
we've had members before who regularly would have an issue where they might be coming late and be notifying staff, or leaving early and notifying staff. And so there was always this thing about them, when they were present, then they would fill in. And so we would think about our votes in terms of that sometimes, as far as like if someone was going to be leaving. So it's an interesting point to bring up of that clear definition. If the chair prefers to operate on saying clear cut when you are present, regardless of, obviously, generally that was also communicated to staff, so it wasn't willy-nilly when they were coming and going, but of saying when you're present, then you are that voting member.
It's helpful for the chair to announce, because, optics, it's known when someone comes in and sits down, but a lot of times it's important to pause and say, we're recognizing Commissioner so-and-so has arrived and we'll be resuming the regular seat, or
Actually, I
plus
think
for the
that
minutes.
from an optics standpoint, I think that's actually important because it re-clarifies the right expectation and it keeps people's feelings from getting hurt.
And you certainly don't want to lose a quorum, because
I was just going to say, you bring up a
that
good point.
could,
Because that threw us off last.
inadvertently happen, right?
Yeah.
Unintentionally, it's not, and at that point, your business is concluded.
But I
Not a
think
quorum.
having it documented, because we're here tonight, we have that understanding, but then when we bring new people on, then they need to be able to see that and read it and understand it. If it's not written, then they won't know that.
I agree.
Okay.
So just announced by the chair, arrival and position status?
Well, and that whenever
Voting status?
a regular member is present, that they are of a voting position. Is that the clarity that we're saying that we are assuming is the mode, rather than, again, you had given the alternate version of if we're in the middle of discussing on an agenda item, then the alternate, if they started the discussion, you know what I'm saying? Like, there needs to be a clear-cut definition.
Well, we were silent in meaning the alternate is only serving in the absence. So once the other person showed up, that
Perfect.
Yeah.
I would like to,
changed it.
if we're in the middle of a motion, I'd like to finish the motion before we swap members in and out. If we have someone arrive late and they arrive in the middle of a motion and we're discussing the motion, they didn't participate in the original discussion.
That's a good point.
I think the alternate stays until that motion gets voted on, and then we do the swap. That's my thought process.
So maybe something to the effect of, unless a motion is pending.
Currently being,
Currently.
yeah, currently pending,
Yeah.
or,
I like that.
I think it could get muddied. To be honest, like, I like the intent, I really do, because it talks about the people who are present for everything being able to know what's going on, but I do think it could get a little
Yeah.
sticky.
Is there any objection
could,
to that
But I think-
language being
I think
added?
to keep it less sticky, is everyone, well, at least permanent members arrive on time,
Okay.
they stay if they can for the full session. I don't think it happens too often, at least in this
That's the
commission, that we have
thing.
people
I don't
come in
think
and
it's
out.
I would
actually
rather
ever
address it if we find it to be an issue. I think making bylaws more and more heavy and weighty is actually more of an issue. So I wouldn't, but I get the intent, I like the intent, and I would find that if the chair recognizes that it's happening often enough to suggest that the change happen, but right now I'm not seeing evidence for needing that, maybe.
What we can do is do some track changes, and if we feel, because we will strive to maintain your rules so that you still have some flexibility, but if we offer some language around that, we'll be sure that it is identified in a track change That way, the body can decide if they'd like to incorporate it or not.
So Tina, did you say that there are other commissions that have this rule that we're discussing here? That if a regular member is late and arrives, that the regular member then will assume the responsibility for the vote and discussion, and the alternate will, according to this.
They don't have something spelled out that states that. What one commission has that is specific says that the alternate filling in for the regular seat would continue through the agenda item, regardless if it was a voting item or not.
That's what you're really,
Yeah,
that's really what you're.
It's very similar to what I was
Yeah, that's-
trying to
So that
address,
sounds
yeah.
appropriate.
Yeah.
And really, it falls on the weight of or falls on the shoulders of the chair. It's not kind of a burden of the full commission to manage.
Thanks.
That's the job.
Point of clarification, your point was when a motion has been proposed and the discussion is in the middle of a motion, rather than an agenda item.
Absolutely.
I think I see that as being a big point of clarification that needs to happen.
Just keep in mind that sometimes we have an agenda item that lasts 2-3 hours. If we're willing to say, you can't, if you're 5 minutes late and you miss the beginning of that 2-hour conversation, if we,
Hypothetically, we have multiple meetings. Who's to say that an alternate starts on one? If the meeting gets extended, then could that alternate then still serve? I mean,
That's fair, yeah.
The more
I'd go either
language
way.
you put in, the stickier it gets, in my opinion. So unless we find this to be a huge issue, I would question us starting to tweak this, especially when other commissions and boards do not have language that's addressing what we're talking about.
We're already debating this.
I'm assuming that the staff does a presentation to all the new members, and some of this is talked about when you do the yearly updates with new members of what their status is, and
Right, we do them with everybody.
you do it with
Refresher.
everybody, so I'm hoping that some of it comes out. So, I think the responsibility of the commissioners are to know the process. And to some extent, it's your responsibility to be aware and to read this information before you even start. So will there be problems that come up? Sure. Will there be things that, Joy coming in late one day? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think you can put every single thing into something like this. So I think this discussion has been great. Things I wouldn't have thought about, and I'm glad that you guys are the typical planning policy commission that you are, really looking at the details and looking at stuff. But I like the 7, I like the, but I think the chair has to have some responsibility in looking at it. Well, maybe it's better if the regular member votes instead of the alternate. There are times when that might happen, so.
Madam Chair, I respectfully disagree. I think I realize that we're not a quasi-judicial body along the lines of the Development Commission. And I realize also, I agree that we don't have this issue come up. But it seems to me that one sentence in this that says, in the event that a commissioner arrives late and the alternate is filling in for that commissioner, the change, to me, should be defined about how that happens and not be arbitrary, which is to have somebody just saying, well, we'll figure it out when it happens. And it's not complicated to me. It's one sentence additional.
So the sentence would be that
An alternate filling in for a commissioner will be expected to do so until and unless the commissioner arrives, at which point the commissioner will assume the responsibility for the
Then you
continuation.
go back to the question of, well, what if you're in the middle of a discussion, and what if the vote is coming up? Do you step away at that time? So are you going to add that too?
No, I don't think we have to.
If I could make, I'm sorry, I'm so loud. If I could make a comment. So I think without any changes, if you read the rules to their literal phrasing, it's the alternate serves in the absence of a regular member. So if that regular member, that seventh person arrives, the alternate would automatically not be serving. And I think if you want to make an exception for that, you could add it to the rules. However, I also think as the regular member that walks in late and you walk in and the room's full and there's discussion going, that you could say, Madam Chair, I would like to wait to resume my seat until this item is completed. And I don't think you need the rules to allow, I think that could be within your right. So I think, so there you have it. That's what I think.
So maybe in parentheses, write in the optional phrase that we could use. Not optional phrase, but that way it's a learning experience for those who come later and read it and go, oh, I can do this.
I'm not crazy about parentheses and bylaws, just for the.
Well, in the wording that the Transportation Advisory Board has kind of just gives that allowance by saying the alternate may continue to serve until the agenda item. And so it's allowing more space for that exception to be made by the regular member who wants to kind of
It could be at the
wait.
discretion of the chair. I mean, that could be language, may serve at the discretion of the chair as well.
Not a big fan of that language, because the member has the right, not the chair, in that case. Is there a question? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to hand it off to your section. We're going to move on to.
Yeah, so we'll add the language that we just discussed, and as Tina mentioned, you'll have an opportunity to see that on the 23rd, so you can use some of your new skills to amend the rules if you want to deviate from what we just talked about. So we didn't make change, so there are some changes to the voting section of your rules, but they're not substantial. We recently, this past year, went through creating some council rules of procedure and came up with what I think is some really clear language around voting. So we use that language here in your rules. And I just wanted to go over those provisions with you because I think it's just really important as you're serving. So as Tina explained, one important aspect of the voting process is to be clear who is voting, and that's particularly important because your name tags, or there's nothing in your seating arrangement or otherwise that visually indicates who's voting and who's not. So the chair saying that at the outset of the meeting, or when there's some change in people up here, due to someone late arriving is really important. Then also, as I'm sure you're very aware, but just as a reminder, there are very minimal reasons why you may not vote as a member. It's one of your primary obligations as being a commissioner. But if you have a conflict of interest, you should state that before a vote on an issue. And then it is up to the commission to decide by a majority vote if you should or should not be excused from voting. And you could phrase your conflict in that way. I would like to ask that I be excused from voting, but it does come to a vote. And if it's determined that you should not participate, you would leave the room. It sounds as if you don't get many quasi-judicial items before you. So I'm not, basically, the rules, your rules don't specifically talk about the appearance of fairness doctrine because it's addressed in state law, but they do say that that may be another reason why you wouldn't be allowed to vote. Then we come to abstentions. Your rules specify that if you abstain from voting, you will have voted yes. And this aligns with the council's rules, which are actually in the municipal code. And it's important because it does deviate from Robert's rules, so it might be inconsistent if you've served on other boards or commissions. So if you, and we feel the intent behind this is to really compel you to vote. We need things done. We're a small community. You're a small group. We need to, move things forward. So if you felt it was important to abstain on a vote, you would need to say something during debate because the chair isn't going to know when she calls the vote if you're maybe just not paying attention or if you're intentionally staying silent. But your vote will be counted as a yay. It's not going to be noted any differently. So we want you to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's I'm going to pause so you really hear that one, which is an abstention doesn't mean you're neutral. It just means you are going with the favored the yes vote. You sort of delegated that yes to your other commissioners.
Can I make sure I understand? So if I have a conflict of interest in something, and I recognize that, and I...
Like valid, like there's a
Valid,
real estate,
yeah.
there's...
I own the
yeah.
property that you were about... yeah,
Correct.
Whatever. And so I say I'm going to abstain. Maybe I'm...
No, we
Wrong
would
words.
want you to recuse yourself, or what, is
Not
that the right?
abstain, but...
That would
Correct.
actually be a conflict of interest. where you
Conflict
step
of interest,
outside.
and recuse yourself from the discussion and move to not be in attendance at that time.
And that is not a yes vote. That is a different animal.
That is
That
no
is-
vote,
that is
no
a no
discussion,
vote. All right.
nothing.
That, basically, if you're in the room, there's going to be a vote counted for you. So if there's a conflict and you are being recused or excused from voting, you would, or similarly with the fairness disclosure, you would not be up there for the vote.
Yeah,
For the vote for the discussion, period.
either.
Yeah, and I guess that depends. I would suggest also, if this is an issue, you should reach out to staff, and we can also put you in touch with our city attorney if you want to discuss more of the nuances of when that should happen or how you bring it forward. But as far as voting, I wanted you to be aware that you would need to leave the room, that abstaining is a yes vote. There's not a provision for sitting in your chair and not voting and not having your vote counted.
Can a commissioner who leaves the room come back at the end of
Yeah.
a new
Right.
agenda item
Yes.
comes up? They can come back in?
Right, and we
Yes.
typically, when that happens, we just note in the minutes, Commissioner so-and-so returned at X time, or returned, and it's reflected in the order of when they re-entered.
Clear. Okay, and the other two aspects of this, I have some separate slides for. So at the meeting, the joint meeting with the Development Commission in May, we talked a little bit about efficient meetings, and we talked about unanimous consent a little bit. But it is a great tool, and so I wanted to just remind you of it tonight and give you two different examples, just some caveats that it should be used for things that are routine and not controversial. It shouldn't be used, for example, for your ultimate recommendation to the council or to adopt findings of fact or amend your rules, but it is a great tool in other regards. So this sounds like the chair saying, the minutes of November 14th are on the agenda for approval. Is there any objection to approving them as presented? Pause. Got to be a pause so that someone has an opportunity to object. And actually, you could continue going with this, even if, so say there is maybe not quite an objection, but yes, actually I see on page 2, some comments I made were attributed to a different commissioner. I'd like to move that they be amended. The chair could say, is there any objection to the amendment on page 2 to attribute the comments to this commissioner? Hearing none, pause. That amendment is approved. Is there any objection to amending the minutes as approved? Hearing none, the minutes as amended are approved. Another way you can use this unanimous consent that I think would work well for the commission is for public hearings. So there doesn't need to be a motion to close a public hearing, but as you probably know, once a public hearing is closed, it's closed. And so it can be a good opportunity to check in with your fellow commissioners to ensure there's not a desire to continue hearing from the community. So the chair could say, is there any objection to closing the public hearing? Now, if there is, in this case, there needs to be some more information. So someone objects and the chair might say, do you have a motion to continue this hearing? That needs to include a date and a time or your next regular meeting. And at that point, you could take a vote on whether to continue the public hearing to your next regular meeting, or you could do a unanimous consent again. So just being mindful with unanimous consent, if anyone says object or has any hesitation with it, likely the issue needs to be voted on, because with a unanimous consent motion, there can't be any disagreement. There also can't be debate. If you're going to debate something, it should result in a vote. And there are some nuances to that, but I think the simplest way to proceed is if there is opposition or uncertainty, proceed with a vote. There's no requirement you do this, but it is a tool that you can use.
So if we wanted to have a motion and a second,
No
that's
problem.
perfectly fine.
That's
Perfectly
perfectly
fine.
fine. It can be helpful if you're sort of midstream with a discussion, or if it's something really minor. So maybe there's a wording issue you notice, an incorrect word, or a missing word, a missing letter, something very simple, and it feels a little strange to have a full-fledged vote on it. But you're always needing to ensure there's agreement, even for small changes like that, because again, you're making decisions as a group, not one person with a loud voice or one person with a persuasive argument. So unanimous consent can be a way to kind of ensure, is there any objection to this? And sort of just be clear moving forward that the group has authorized.
So objection to the minutes is not the, I mean, I'm seeing, so yeah, when I read the packet, I don't think that's what I said or my fellow commissioners said, but that's not that should be described as an objection to approval of the minutes? Or is it a correction, a requested? I'm not quite clear.
So I think the example I was giving, what the chair was saying, is there any objection to approving the minutes as presented? And in the scenario I was saying there was, because there was an error. And so there was an objection so that there could be an opportunity to correct them.
So
and
there is, yes, I have an objection because on page 3, so, okay.
yeah,
Correct.
I'd
And
like to
then-
offer an amendment.
Okay.
You don't need to, as Tina mentioned at the outset, you don't need to get too caught up on the wording
Of the wording of,
your saying, no,
object.
wait, I have an amendment, or I have an objection and an amendment, whatever. But just making sure you, at that point in time, clarify that you want to do something.
Okay, so it's objection, not I have a correction.
That's why I'm saying I think you can be flexible. I think you need to let the chair know that, wait, I'm not ready to give my consent to this.
you simply are responding, raising your hand or saying, Madam Chair, I have an edit that needs
Okay.
to be made.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if the edit needs a motion and a second, or if it's
It
minor,
can,
it
if
doesn't-
that's just easy for you to move
Right.
through the item, then
Absolutely.
proceed in that path, but you can still deal with an amendment through, is there no objection to making that change? Seeing none, it's incorporated, all those, the minutes are approved without objection.
Okay, and in that vein, I wanted to just talk for a minute about voting protocol, because it is important, and it sort of just re-emphasizes some of the things we've talked about tonight. But so what does it sound like? And I know you do this all the time, so you're very familiar with this language, but I'll just run through the voting protocol. So it would sound like, is there any further discussion on this issue? If there's none, the motion before the body is to approve the findings of fact on the Old Town Sub-Area Plan as amended. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? By a vote of 3-2, the findings of fact are adopted. So just, and I know your chairs change and you fill in for each other. This is really important to get right during a meeting, to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to cast their vote, that they're clear on what's being voted on, and then the outcome is announced so that you and the public are clear. And if you're unsure what the outcome is, phone a friend, talk to one of the ladies over here to get clarity. If it's a tie vote, it does fail. And the municipal code states that your proposals must be approved by a majority of a quorum. So that's going to be a majority of the number of people serving here.
Yeah, if it's unclear what the outcome of the vote is, it's important to deal with that right away. So the chair would say, could those in favor who said aye, can you raise your hands as well? And then you'd take that moment to raise your hands. And those that were in the negative, please confirm by raising your hand as well. So that way you can get the true count announced. But you wouldn't want to have a vote only by show of hands. So just remember, it's voice and show of hands if you're going to go to that level. And anyone can ask for that. I'm unclear. And then you would pause and say, who were the ayes and who were the nays?
So we would like to ensure that you're clear on your rules and regulations. So if you have any questions either on the sections we covered or on other sections or had any changes in mind, this would be a great opportunity to talk about those. And we have another section prepared, but I see that we're at our time. And so we can, I think what might be best is to see if there's any, I have maybe a few points I'd like to make, and then we can open it up to questions. But before we do that, any other aspects of the rules that you'd like to discuss? Yes?
Yeah, we haven't talked about this. Members have a right to an efficient meeting, number 6. And so I'm confused, and maybe you don't want to talk about that now because we haven't talked about it, but, so I don't mind, I just have a question. So do you want to talk about that now or later?
Let's go for it, because we are at our time. So I think our planned time, so why don't we, if you saw some materials in the packet that were, or do you?
Yeah, I think I've been
Okay.
signaled by staff
signaled. Oh,
liaison,
thank
but I
you.
will look to the
Okay.
chair to find out, how much time are you affording us?
So I was going to say, does anybody want to make a motion to extend the time for continuation of the discussion by 10 minutes? Does anybody,
I'd like to make a second to that.
No, you have to have a motion
you
first.
don't have to have a motion. Okay, we do
I'm sorry.
consensus. Do we have a consensus on the floor to extend the meeting for 10 minutes?
Yes.
Not the meeting, but the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. So consensed.
Okay, so then I think we'll back up a little bit. Is that okay? Okay.
Happy to do with it.
And so were there any other questions on the rules? Was
I
that
did
a
have
no?
one question. There
Okay.
was, I believe it's back on the previous page, we were looking about alternates, and it had mentioned inadvertent quorums. So just to be clear, if I'm out talking with Commissioner Reinhardt, and we happen to talk about something that happened tonight, or something that might have happened at the next meeting, that would not be inappropriate, would it?
It's not a violation if you're talking to one other member. It's a violation if you have proceeded to take that conversation and talk to 2 other members. So if you've reached a quorum of your commission or gathered of 4 members and you're discussing your board business, that would be a no-no. I added the word inadvertent because it's OPMA and you're obligated to serve in that capacity, and we just thought we recognize that individuals are not purposefully violating the OPMA, and we want to ensure that you're not inadvertently doing it by having a discussion with
So
someone.
my understanding is as long as there's not 4 of us, as long as there's not a workable quorum, or like a public.
string.
Or a
of
string, so almost like a public hearing. We're not continuing this conversation. I'm not trying to vote gather with other commissioners.
Correct, that would be
I meet Bill on
inappropriate.
Thursday, I talked to Joan on Friday, and I'm not gathering. The idea being, as long as the conversation ended between the 2 of us, that's acceptable, that's appropriate.
That's acceptable.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to be clear on that.
And you can share information to the entire commission, so long as you're not then discussing it as a commission outside of a meeting. So if you read an article and didn't shape an opinion around it and just said, I found an interesting article, I'm sharing it with you, you can also pass it on to the staff liaison to do that for you, so you are more separated from that optics.
Yeah, I mean, more or less just talking to people outside, but like you said, just keeping it separate.
All right, so I'll cover this quickly, but I think that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about parliamentary procedure, and we know that many times there's not a large audience here, and you have probably become familiar with each other, and you're a smaller group, but it is still important to have some sort of fundamental practices, and this really protects you if you have changes in membership and maybe have a person who is, may have a tendency to try and dominate a meeting. As you recently experienced when there's controversy, those things can kind of shine a light on the practices. And if you have certain protocols in place and we're not We are not suggesting that you follow Robert's rule to the letter in every situation, but they'll help. They'll help make it easier. They'll help your meeting run smoother and take less time. So Robert's Rules is almost 700 pages. So it's a big book. These are 6 key principles that most everything in here falls under. These were taken from one of our local experts, Ann McFarlane of Jurassic Parliament, who does a lot of trainings. So I'm just going to go through these real quickly and just highlight a couple things that I think are helpful and important, and then if you have any questions. And we do have a quiz sort of at the back of this section. You can take that on your own. At a later time. But the first principle is the majority must be allowed to rule. And so this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, that if someone has a good idea and is vocal about it, that's great, but it's important to ensure that the group is okay with it too, and not just sort of move on. And so that's why a motion is important, a vote is important, or a unanimous consent, some way to ensure there's a gauge of the full group on a new concept. Another point here is that motions have to be seconded, so this is a protection. It's not okay if just one person wants to talk about something, a proposal. They need at least one other person to be either supportive or curious. Something else is, and these are sort of minor points, but once a decision is made by the group and that decision isn't before you again, it's not really appropriate to talk negatively about it. And that's again sort of honoring that that was the decision made by the group at that time, and you're going to honor that. But of course, the minority has rights. This comes to the quorum. There need to be 4 of you to conduct any business. There's a lot of equity, and we'll talk in a minute about equity, but there is a lot of equity among the group, and that's really critical to ensure that you've sort of set things up to be fair, and I have some suggestions for ways that you can do that. And one of the things to think about here that's in Robert's Rules, almost all motions just require a majority of those present, but motions that require a higher threshold, which are 2/3, are those that close debate or put parameters on debate. So those are really valued mechanisms, and if there's a desire to do that, a motion needs to be made, and a 2/3 vote, which is 5 of 7, is required. So one of the minority right protections is each person speaks under debate once before anyone speaks a second time. So sort of all viewpoints get put out there. And one of the suggestions that Ann McFarlane has, and I think it's a great suggestion, and it's one that is generally used at council as well, is sort of doing the round robin. So everyone wants through. If not everyone speaks, that's fine, but it sort of allows that space where everyone gets an opportunity for input before someone starts speaking a second or third time. It also can really help diffuse things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Another principle is that you have the right to have information at hand. And I'm not sure, I've watched parts of some of your meetings if this is used now, but you can, generally it's not okay to interrupt someone who has the floor, but there are some exceptions to that if you feel like some procedure is off, something is not happening the right way, or you're unsure what's going on. What is the motion? Is Robin voting right now, or anything that comes up, you can interrupt and say point of order and ask the chair, who can also phone a friend if they need help, to provide clarity or sometimes sort of rule on a decision. This might be also if you feel like someone's going really off topic, because one of the critical aspects of debate is it needs to stay on topic, not just on the topic, but on the motion. That can be easy to slide away from that, and it's totally appropriate and okay to say, point of order, I think we're straying. And so, again, just want to emphasize that. There's some other sort of technical points that you can make, but one I wanted to mention is that a proposal be made in writing. So if there's a motion in front of the group and you're feeling you think you heard it right, but you're not totally sure, you can ask that it be written down. And that, you can take a brief recess, you can keep the discussion going and have someone write the proposal, you can ask for some staff help in getting something up on the screen, but just know that's within your right and totally an appropriate thing to ask for. So talking a little bit about debate. So it needs to be respectful and it needs to be courteous. And, I'm sure I don't need to belabor that point, but mostly I wanted to talk here about not interrupting except under those special circumstances, and also not engaging in back and forth dialogue, because I think it's so natural for us to do that, especially when there are questions in the debate. Maybe you're sort of posing a question as you're processing something. It's not really appropriate for maybe a person who knows the answer to just jump in there, right? So the chair's the facilitator, and the comments need to go through her, even to the point where really things should be addressed towards her ideally, and not, towards your neighbor or the person you're directing. And again, this helps diffuse. And that round robin method I was talking about also helps with this back and forth. So it's not this sort of, it keeps things a little more diffused. I keep using that word, but it's a good word. Also, or I'll add that if there's a question posed and you know the answer to it, you can certainly ask the chair, Madam Chair, can I take a minute to answer that question? And, there can be allowance for that. But I'd say as a norm, it's a good idea to try and give space and time for that round robin approach.
Quick question?
Yeah.
So if we have a chair, chair. If I have a question concerning another commission member, instead of me addressing the other commission member, I should ask the chair for clarification of what is meant.
Technically, and I know that can feel awkward, and again, we're not here to say you should never look another of your colleagues in the eye while you're speaking, but it would be totally appropriate for you to, Madam Chair, I heard, you don't even need to exactly address it to her, but just say, I heard some comments from my colleague that I'm hoping, he can address in response to this issue. Again, I'm not suggesting you can't turn to each other, but it is important to remember that the chair is the facilitator and in control as far as the dynamics of the meeting. And I think it's not a bad practice to try as much as possible to orient yourself that way. And also that can be helpful when you're dealing with the public too. I think it can be confusing sometimes when you're speaking to the audience, because the meeting is among your commission. You have opportunities for them to participate, during a public hearing or during audience comments. But when you're deliberating, this is your time. And I think sometimes it can imply that they have a role in responding when that's not necessarily the case. For them to come up again and talk, you could ask the chair, I'd really like to hear from someone we heard from either earlier, but it wouldn't be appropriate to, to have them shout from the audience. And so I think, again, kind of focusing in on your chair helps that all seem more natural, right. And it focuses that energy.
And the chair could use that as an opportunity to say, is there an objection to hearing, because it is unusual to bring someone for the audience back who you've already heard from. Is there an objection if we do that? And if there's an objection, then you should move on.
Okay. I think I covered everything there. Well, one other point to mention here is just we've been talking about the chair, the role of the chair a lot, and it is an important role. But the wonderful thing about being a deliberative body is you don't really have statuses. I mean, you do have that alternate regular member distinction, but otherwise you're kind of all on equal footing. And even though the chair is really facilitating the meeting, the idea is that they're using impartiality and restraint. In the environment I worked in previously at the state legislature, if the chair desired to make comments on a proposal, they relinquished their chair and gave it to a colleague and stepped down so they could make comments. And that was really to protect that role as a neutral facilitator. And in a small board, that is not necessary. But there are some best practices there, which can be speaking at last, can be voting last, just again demonstrating that you are facilitating the group and that role isn't being used as an opportunity to speak twice as much as everyone else. So I just wanted to point out, sometimes it can be confusing about the privileges associated with that role, but it's really one of neutral facilitator. Members have a right to an efficient meeting. So you have an agenda that's provided to you with times. Thank you for your graciousness tonight, allowing some extra time. Again, we talked about debate needs to be specific to a motion. A motion is also important. If someone's belaboring a point and there's not a motion, it could be appropriate to encourage them to make a motion, because maybe there's not a second for their motion. So a motion is a great tool to help ensure that you're not just talking, you're talking towards a point in time.
And the words of a motion are important.
They are.
What we don't want to hear as clerks is, so moved. A motion is, I move to, and then specifics. What is the motion? What is the action? What is the direction? That's the component that's really important, because it provides clarity on what they hear and what you're actually voting on.
So I think that I've covered the bulk of these principles and some of the points that I was hoping to share with you. And as I mentioned, there are some quiz questions which you're welcome to, take a look at, take a gander at if you're interested. But were there any questions on any of those points or anything else procedurally?
About efficient meetings. So line number 2, limited discussion allowed prior to motion. I got a bit confused when I was reading your essential, when I say the essential guidelines, which was also part of the package. And if you go to the essential guidelines, it seems to imply something different about the process. The essential, do you have that, the essential guidelines?
The packet, do you want to?
It's, yes.
I can talk.
It's the first page of the essential guidelines for citizen advisory committees. It's the middle of it says, ordinarily, a committee member must make a motion before any discussion begins. If there's no second, the motion is not taken up. So I compare that with what I just read on this second line, and I'm getting confused to when exactly discussion is allowed to take place.
Yeah, that's that was a very nuanced aspect there. Thank you for picking up on that. So the reason is that you're considered a small board. There are less than 12 of you. So in Robert's rules, there's a whole specific section to small boards. And they kind of say some things like, you don't need to stand up when you talk, because in some more formal groups, you would. They also say things like there can be some discussion before a motion. But I do, as I mentioned, I do think that, and I'm not sure how this flow is naturally for your group. I know at council, usually there's some question and answer time, and then maybe a little of discussion, but then usually the chair is sort of prompting that a motion be made, again, to help move the meeting along. So there is some latitude for a small board, and that's what you are picking up on. Any other questions?
Andy?
I'm not clear why, when we need a quorum, why we have an even number for a quorum instead of an odd number.
It has to do with the voting. So you have 7 members, and so in order for a quorum to be, you divide it in half and you add 1. So you have 7 members.
Round up to the next.
Yeah, you round up and divide it in half, basically.
So, but if there are we only have.
If you
4
only have
people
4,
here,
it
and
does make it
you have 2 and
difficult.
2, that's.
But a tie ultimately fails.
A tie fails.
Tie fails.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's why you have 7 members. I mean, we recommend as the clerk's office that you have an odd number group, but your dynamics are going to change. You're going to end up with an even number occasionally.
Right. And that's something that, as our clerks here, when we attend council meetings, if we're down an individual, we start thinking about, in our case, the mayor does have some voting rights on occasion, and we start looking at our agenda items to figure out what if there were to be a tie vote, and how would we manage the meeting in those cases? Because she can break a tie in certain circumstances.
I'm recalling a time where we had a motion that failed, and we continued discussion and were able to come to a consensus and have a vote. And we've also had other times where we've sent it back and with an advisory of a split rather than a fail. So are either of those situations permissible where we find that failure, continue on to try and find latitude, as well as sending it on as an advisory split, though it is technically a failure?
For the first scenario, that's a parliamentary procedure called a reconsideration, and that's a right that you have. Usually it's during the same meeting. And it's interesting, it was actually a bullet point under the rights of the majority, because technically someone who voted in the majority, so if it failed, someone who voted to fail it or to not support it would have to say, I'd like to reconsider the vote. And and then there's a vote on that. And if a majority believe the vote should be reconsidered, then that vote's in front of the group again and can be voted on again, and then that's the final word. It just kind of wipes the slate clean of the prior vote. So there is a mechanism.
Voting, it's a second vote on it versus readdressing the issue.
Well, technically, that is the way to readdress the issue.
That is a reconsideration.
Properly. But, you know, it sounds like that it organically came to be. Technically, the group's not supposed to consider the same question twice in a meeting. This is, again, to help with efficient meetings. If it fails, it fails. Unless someone who failed it has changed their mind, it shouldn't be before the group again. So but there is a mechanism for that. And there is a mechanism for doing that even at a subsequent meeting that requires some higher vote thresholds and some noticing, but if the group, you know, is wanting to take a different position. On the other situation that you explained, I'd say that's sort of outside of the realm of parliamentary procedure, and that was more of a statement by the commission. And so I'm assuming there was, maybe there was a discussion about the vote failing, but a desire to ensure that that was conveyed to the body you were recommending to. And I'm not sure exactly how that played out, but I think, I mean, so the proposal, that was your recommendation, that you couldn't come to agreement, but it was a close vote. So that seems reasonable.
Reasonable recommendation to make.
But you can start a discussion and have a new motion that has nothing to do with it. So there are two things in there that have to be clear.
Because ultimately, if a vote fails, you could still make a new motion in order to
So long as it wasn't the identical
explain,
motion.
you know, concerns about fellow commissioners. So.
Yes, to convey, I mean, there is a lot of flexibility in how you convey things. I think some of the basics we talked about tonight are, you know, try and ensure there's agreement, be really clear on what's occurring both for yourselves and for those who are recording your action. Try and seek equity among your debate and maintain that some of those protocols that help ensure things stay diffused and courteous. So we've really enjoyed our time with you tonight, and thank you for that extension of time earlier.
That's great.
And you certainly cleared up and at the same time confused.
We are available. We know that you'll have the bylaws on your future agenda, so if there's something further that needs to be clarified, please ask us.
No, I think the questions from the commission were good, and I think it's a good thing to go through once in a while, because we really haven't gone through this to the extent that we've done it tonight, so thank you for being here. Is there any additional good for the order discussion that anybody would like to bring up before we close the meeting?
I would like to talk to staff about our schedule that we have in front of us for the year, specifically what's waiting for 2021. And I would like to know why some of these decisions were made. We've been hearing for a while that things were going to be addressed in this year. It was under my understanding that housing strategy number 8 was going to be addressed this year. Also, I'm kind of curious to just hear from staff about the decisions about what's being postponed to the following calendar year.
Which is number 8? Mine aren't numbered on my schedule.
The missing middle for housing.
That is supposed to be, number 8, I see what you mean. That is supposed to be this year. I think we're waiting, when we wrote this, we hadn't written up our work plan for this year, so everything was in that box. But we found we're not getting another staff member, so it's just Kristen and I. And so things are sort of changed just because there's only the 2 of us, and one of us is only part-time. I'll let you guys guess which one that is. And so we can't do as much as we would like to do, but we'll, I'm not sure when missing middle will come. I've heard, because Title 18, the whole land use code is coming to you and the council this year, that when pieces of it are worked through with you all, that it will go into the Title 18. So there's some meshing of the Title 18 team and us to make sure that they efficiently get done it together so that you don't adopt something and then it has to go into Title 18. And then you have to look at it twice. So we're trying to not have it that be in that process.
Historic preservation will be a part of that Title 18 update as well.
Okay. And why aren't we getting, is it a budget thing? Is there a reason that we have for why that staff member isn't coming on board?
A lot of the staff members aren't getting refilled. And part of it's budget, part of it's just trying to figure out how to do more efficiently.
Okay. I would request specifically regarding our housing strategies, that though we're not going to be addressing it, if there's room on our calendar, that maybe we could have a meeting with staff saying, here's where we're at, and continue that discussion and talk about it a little bit rather than having it completely dropped off.
Right, and you will be getting a housing report card in the first quarter that talks all about the housing strategy and how we're doing on all 9. So that'll be coming to you.
But it would be nice to specifically have a point in that discussion where we talk about kind of where staff is at, even though it's, the whole strategy won't be brought to us this year, of kind of an update of saying, here's what our thinking is, here's what we're hoping, and kind of have something that's a refresh, because it's obviously, we've been talking about these things for years. And so it would be nice to have something updated, if that makes sense.
Right, and I think that'll be what the report card is, but we can present it to you so you can ask questions if we don't have enough information in there that you would like.
Thank you.
What's the status of the sign code?
That would be part of Title 18 now.
Okay.
It's not going as a separate piece.
Okay.
I have one. How often, if ever, do we actually review planning documents of adjacent cities, King County? On 17 of 69, there's a number 3 says that part of our duties are to review planning documents of adjacent cities, King County, and other agencies, so on and so forth.
We haven't in a while. That's usually if an annexation, something like that, or like when the city of Sammamish was trying to incorporate there for a while. It had 3 different versions. We looked at that to see if any of those worked better or not as well for Issaquah. It's those kinds of things, but we haven't in a while. Growth targets will review those with you, and you'll be able to see what other jurisdictions, sort of how that whole thing is going on that the mayor mentioned.
Would that be, would the urban growth boundary be one of the issues that might come before the PPC if it were under discussion?
That goes before King County Council. I think it's every 5 years they're allowed to change it, and we would share it with you, because it would, if our boundary changes, that's part of what you all do. The last time I think we did that was when the Highlands, when we got the little bumps for Bellevue College and the, I forgot what the other 2 bumps are, but there was something that you all looked at, that we did a swap for urban land and rural land, so we could bump out for Bellevue College.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I got one more. If nobody else does. In regards to the meeting for this Saturday.
Yes.
If we're not able to attend, is staff able to either in another meeting or informally send out like details, kind of how the workshop goes, what people say? Often we kind of get after in meetings, and we'll say we held this number of workshops, and these were the thoughts, and these were what was expressed to us, and things like that. Is that going to come before us in another meeting, or are we able to get a summary to kind of see about how?
We will have minutes from that meeting, and we will also gather all the comments that were made and post those on the website as well. And then we have a joint Development Commission and PPC meeting on Wednesday, February 12th, and we will report back at that meeting as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. As a side note to that, the land use code amendments for Old Town that you all reviewed back in September, the last public hearing, you all took action on September 16th. Those have been pushed out again for the 3rd time in City Council, so they will now be at the study session on tentatively February 25th, and then they will take action on those March 16th. So I cannot give you any feedback on what council has to say so far.
Well, February 12th is not a tentative anymore.
February 12th is not a tentative, no.
No, it's a,
It was last week when the schedule was developed. Thanks for pointing that out, though, Ron.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor? Or, excuse me, Madam Chair. This could be a good opportunity to check in on upcoming absences, too, so that they could be noted on the planning calendar document that you maintain, or noted in the minutes.
There you go, because this is
Just a
usually when I
suggestion.
ask if who all's going to be here for the 23rd. Do we have anyone that knows right now that they're not going to be here for the 23rd?
I will be here.
Will be.
Okay, and I will also send you an RSVP by email, just in case you don't feel appreciated enough, because I just really want to know that you're going to be here. Excellent, and just for fun, anyone going to be here tomorrow, or not tomorrow morning, Saturday morning with the great weather for the nice tour and a nice workshop?
I'll bring the
One?
shovels.
And bring shovels and galoshes, 2?
Yeah.
3? Oh, wow, 4? Oh, you're abstaining? Is that what you said?
Yes.
That's a yes. Yeah, good. We learned.
And so this was, this meeting was set up to accomplish
Go for it.
what?
On the,
Oh, no, Saturday.
on Saturday, that's,
Is that the 12th?
It's
that's the 11th.
It is.
11th.
I'm confused, that's the 11th. On the 12th, we are kicking off the Old Town architectural standards and guidelines process. And we are hoping that everybody from the Old Town neighborhood will come. We sent out letters to all of the Old Town residents and property owners, actually, so businesses were included in this. So as part of the Old Town Plan update, you may recall that we included in there policies and actions to update the existing standards for the cultural and business district and for the multifamily areas that currently have them. So we'll be updating those. We were also asked to potentially create architectural standards and/or guidelines for the single-family duplex zone. And that includes both single-family houses and duplexes in there. I think there's been some confusion because the name is zone, but it's for all the properties within that area. So this is something we've never done before, and treading lightly on these waters, and we want to get together with all the property owners on Saturday and say, what exactly do you mean by this? And it's sort of, do you really want to regulate styles? And if you do, let's talk about it and what kinds. If not, tell us why, and that's great, we'll move on. And we're going to break into small groups and have discussions and do the tour and talk about elements. You know, people are walking through their town, their neighborhoods and probably see houses but don't see elements. So that's the purpose of the tour, is to start looking at the individual pieces.
So it won't be structured as a public hearing?
No, not at all. It is
Will it be
simply
here in
discussion. There are
chambers?
no decisions being made at that meeting. It is simply discussion to get feedback from property owners.
Will
And
be
it's
here
at
in
the
chambers?
senior, it's in the senior center.
We'll start at the senior center?
start at the senior
have
center at
workshop
9.
and then do the tour? Or
No, it's just the opposite. Start at the senior center, do a tour, and then have our workshop also at the senior center.
So, Krishna, the Old Town architectural standards are going to be developed in the future, but we're not going to use the same process for the Old Town that we've used for the architectural standards for the Central District, which was a consultant comes in and says, here's what we think would be a good range of options for this area and so on. And it was it was really good process as far as I was concerned, because it really gave everybody an idea. If you want to do this here are your options. But so I'm.
It's similar. We have a consultant who's done this before, who's coming in to do this for us.
Same one?
Different consultant.
Okay.
She has worked with neighborhoods before and done this with single-family properties. Single-family is a little different than it is when you do big, giant buildings. So I think it's a little more sensitive in this case, and we're trying to recognize that and acknowledge that. And so it's similar, but slightly different. I will say Lucy Sloman, who worked on the standards for Central Issaquah, is also very involved in this process, so we're following it closely.
Can you send us an invite so we can get on our calendars?
It was, I believe you received an agenda yesterday. The
Special meeting?
special meeting on the 11th.
Oh, I didn't see it.
But to have it on your calendars, it is Saturday, September 11th, at the Senior
No,
Center.
not September.
I'm sorry, why do I keep doing that? Saturday, January 11th, starting at 9 a.m. at the Senior Center. The tour is from 9 to 10, and then we wind up back at the Senior Center where we will also have a workshop from 10 until noon.
So even though this is a special meeting, Kristen, this is not one where attendance is taken.
That's a good question.
You do have a clerk in the room.
Phone a friend.
It is posted as a special meeting so that you can attend this forum, this event, because otherwise you would have to limit your attendance to less than a quorum. And we want you to be able to go and participate to the fullest extent possible. You will not be making any board decisions, commission decisions that evening or that morning, but it is a future agenda item of yours. So we want to encourage your attendance so that you're more informed for when this item becomes in front of you as a joint meeting. Did you have a second part of that question? Oh, attendance, yes. This is a special meeting. You will need minutes, but it's more of who attended, when did it start and when did it end, and you could actually just take the agenda as is and create your minutes from that. It doesn't need to have any
And they wouldn't be
debate and
excused.
dialogue as part of it.
But they're not excused or are not excused. No, I'm,
Unexcused.
absences, I was looking for the A word, absences, or are they, because it's a Saturday?
Well, if they're informing you, then you could list it as
Is
excused.
excused, okay, okay.
You know, it's not a required
Okay,
meeting.
that's, okay,
So you could have some leeway as just say those that are in attendance are all excused.
okay.
I'm sorry, Tina, did you say it's not required?
Well, it's not a
There's no
commission
functioning
meeting.
business.
It's a community meeting
Right.
that we would like you to be able to attend.
Right.
But under state law, we have to issue it as an agenda and have a special meeting notice. If
We're
you,
there in an unofficial capacity.
unofficial capacity, but we notice it so you can attend. And because it's a special meeting, you do need minutes to indicate that it occurred.
Can I make an observation personally? I was going to attend it because I saw it in the newsletter, the
Yep.
city newsletter, but when did the special meeting notice come out? Yesterday?
Yeah.
It was yesterday.
Yike.
Well, you have 24 hours to notice it. This community forum has been advertised for some time now, and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the neighbors received notices.
Right.
This is a courtesy to ensure that the full board can attend if they want. Otherwise, you would have had to say only 3 of you could have attended and then reported back to the group.
Oh, I didn't, so if I just showed up, okay, no, I'm sorry.
So now it's noticed, and you can, and you
Right.
don't have to worry about a quorum issue,
wasn't
because it's been noticed as a courtesy.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Yeah, I'll ask
Yeah, I
one
think it
more
was yesterday.
time. Does anybody have any other, anything good for the order?
It's nice to see everybody again.
Would like to encourage you to look at the new city website. They did a really good job in doing it, so I meant to tell the mayor when she was here that I think it's looks really good, professional, good job. I listened to the guy presented at the council meeting, and I went back and I looked at it. It was really good. So anyway, with that, I'm going to call the meeting, since there's nobody here to
For public comments?
have a comment, got to be at 8:20.